So we may have talked about the story of glyphosate when we first had an introduction to amino acid structure, because glyphosate actually in its structure can actually be seen as a modified version of glycine. We actually could call it a methyl phosphate of glycine. So let's draw the structure and we'll understand why. So if I'm going to draw a phosphate here, and I've got glycine that I'm going to draw here. Okay, and let's actually draw this in its what should be its proper protonation state. Okay, so we've got essentially a methyl phosphate of glycine. So let's see how we see this. Okay, so here's where we find glycine. Okay, so here's glycine as an amino acid, right? We've got our NC-alpha carbonyl, right? Glycine only has 2 hydrogen atoms, so it's the only achiral amino acid, right? A little bit of a review there. Okay, it is going to be a methyl, so there's our extra carbon, a methyl phosphate. So again, here is the phosphate group. So it is a methyl phosphate of glycine. So that's where we have structurally how it's related and why we're talking about it again in our protein chapter here. Okay, so why is glyphosate all over the news, or why is it biologically or environmentally important? Well, little history on it. Glyphosate was called a 1 in 100 year discovery. What does that mean? Well, it means basically it contributed to agriculture what they say penicillin contributed to medicine. So glyphosate contributed to agriculture what penicillin did for medicine. It was revolutionary. And so it was a very potent, broad spectrum herbicide and desiccant. So it's a very potent, broad spectrum herbicide and desiccant. Okay, so why is that important? Well, an herbicide is going to kill plants. And a desiccant is going to dry stuff up. Okay, and this is important from an agricultural standpoint because then you can get grains to dry faster. So dry grains faster. And it helps to increase the sucrose concentration in things like sugar beets. So all things that are going to increase yield help from an agricultural standpoint when it's being used as a desiccant. But it also kills plants, and that's important if those plants that you're looking to kill are weeds. So just a little bit of background as to how and why it does that. It actually is going to inhibit the production of aromatic amino acids, so tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine. And if you eliminate that, then plant seeds are not able to germinate. Well, that sounds like a problem if you're trying to grow things in a garden or something like that. So here's the key piece, is that it will kill plants as long as they are not plants that are genetically modified. Now, I want to put a little caveat here and say that by and large, genetically modified organisms are not bad, right? We've just introduced genes in them that give them special superpowers. The superpowers in genetically modified organisms here are such they are resistant to glyphosate, which means they can grow in the presence of glyphosate. Glyphosate does not have the ability to prevent seed germination of these genetically modified organisms. Now, that superpower in and of itself isn't bad. What's problematic is the fact that glyphosate is used. And glyphosate has environmental problems, it has physiological problems, and we'll get into what those are in just a minute. So I just wanted to make sure to highlight that a genetically modified organism isn't necessarily bad, but in this case, having a genetically modified organism allows for the use of this herbicide, and it's this herbicide that's fundamentally the piece that's problematic. So again, it will kill plants and weeds that are not genetically modified such that they have a superpower to resist that inhibition. Okay, so they can resist that inhibition, so they're able to germinate and grow. And the story that we have here is of the company that was called Monsanto. So Monsanto is a company that made glyphosate resistant crops. And they have a patent for this. So they have seeds that they've patented that are genetically modified such that they can grow in the presence of glyphosate. You know, normal plants would not be able to grow in the presence of glyphosate, again, because they would be prevented from germinating. So you're going to kill everything except for the plant that you want to grow. And not only does Monsanto create the seeds, Monsanto made the herbicide, okay, that you want to use for the plants. And again, they have a patent for this as well. So this could be seen as a conflict of interest that you have to sort of buy both of these products. But you know, on its surface, it seems like this is sort of a beautiful thing in terms of its ability to contribute to agriculture. You have the ability to have massive growth of only the plants that you want with the elimination of those that you don't. And at its core, that would be problematic, or not be problematic, that would actually be great, except for there's two problematic pieces that we have with glyphosate. The first is that it is pervasive and persistent. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, it's pervasive in that we find it everywhere, okay? And connected to this, it's persistent. Nothing breaks it down in the environment. So once we get this guy out into the environment, nothing breaks it down. Nothing gets rid of it. We could use it as we call an anthropogenic tracer. Caffeine is an anthropogenic tracer. We know that high levels of caffeine come from its use in human products. And so when we see lots of caffeine, because caffeine doesn't break down in the environment, we know that that it's an indication that humans have been here. Well, the same can be said of glyphosate, and unfortunately, because it's persistent, it's pervasive. It is found all over the world, and its levels are only increasing. Okay? So why is that necessarily a problem? Well, glyphosate was first actually identified because it was an antimicrobial agent. So it kills bacteria. So us consuming things that have glyphosate has the potential to be really detrimental to our microbiome, the same way that excessive use of antibiotics can be really detrimental to our microbiome. And beyond that, a big piece here is in 2015, the World Health Organization labeled glyphosate as a probable carcinogen. So the fact that it is likely to contribute to the development of cancer is something that's indicating that maybe we should think about not having this. Now, the genie's out of the bottle with glyphosate. It's used all over, right? If you look at any weed killer that you might even use in your lawn, right? It's likely that it contains glyphosate. So it is used all over the place. And unfortunately, it's not going away anytime soon, not only from its kind of commercial production and sale, but just in the environment. So think about this in terms of how much you want to consume, non-organic produce, for example, or non-organic anything, because if it's made with genetically modified organisms, the problem is not that those genetically modified organisms are bad. It's likely, if it's a plant that's a genetically modified plant, it was made in the production of glyphosate, and glyphosate is really what we want to avoid. So a little, unfortunately, sad story about glyphosate.